Hi, everyone. Welcome back to one of our live Q&As with Be Inspired Counseling and Consulting. I'm Christy Pennison, and I have Elizabeth Beebe with me. And today we are going to be talking about something that I think we can all take something from, and that is how to communicate through conflict. So I don't know about you, but relationships can be challenging at times. And when you have two people who have different personalities, perspectives, mindsets, points of view, ways of doing things, whether it be in your personal life or in your career or work, conflict is bound to happen at some point. So I asked Elizabeth Beebe to come on today with me as one of our couples therapists to just kind of talk with us about, number one, why does conflict happen? But number two, how can you communicate through the conflict in a way that is healthy and positive? It may be hard, but how can you have those difficult conversations that you need to have? And what's the best ways to resolve conflict in a healthy manner? So welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi.
All right. So Elizabeth, just tell me a little bit about what you see as common issues, or maybe I guess we can say, are common pitfalls when it comes to maybe how conflicts develop and then how people respond typically in conflict.
Well, typically conflict develops because we're communicating. We're trying to communicate something. We want someone to know something, or we want them to do something different. And so we're trying to get whatever that message is across. But a lot of times we don't quite know how to do that in the best way, especially when feelings are involved or we're angry or sad or frustrated. So a lot of times the way we might say things and communicate them is unhealthy and leads to arguments and conflicts. So really, I mean, if we're human and communicating, then we're going to run into conflict at some point because we're not perfect at being able to manage our emotions or the things we want to say.
Well, and I like how you said what becomes hard a lot of times in conflict is that there are emotions involved typically. So typically most people are not going into a conflict in a very calm, centered, grounded manner,
No,
right? I mean, do you see that?
not at all.
There's normally emotions, and well, what kind of emotions are typically involved? I mean, I think we all probably know what these are, but what emotions are involved typically in a conflict?
Well, anger, frustration, disappointment, sometimes rejection. Those are some of the biggest ones.
Yeah. So what are ways that you see or that are typical ways that people respond when they are in conflict? Because I know everybody handles conflict differently. And so
Mhm.
what are some of those ways that people typically respond to conflict that you see?
So, four of like the main ways that we respond to conflict if it's unhealthy. So this is responding, not really paying attention to what we're saying or doing or putting a lot of thought into it. We're just reacting to the moment. We are criticizing, saying what is wrong with the other person, not even necessarily what's wrong with what they're doing, but what's wrong with them as a person. So we can be attacking and criticizing. Um, we get defensive really easily. We want to defend our point. And once we get defensive, it's really hard to hear what the other person's saying. There's contempt. And this is kind of like attacking the other person, um, almost like a level of emotional abuse. So putting them down, mocking them. Um, this is like calling names, things like that when we're upset.
Well, and what is the difference between kind of criticism and then more contempt? Because criticism, it sounds like it's a little bit different.
So criticism really is more just verbally attacking someone's personality, their
Mhm.
character. Um, you're a jerk. Things like that.
Mhm.
You
Or you
never
could do this better, or this thing right there. Well, you're
right.
telling me you're saying that there's this thing about me that you don't like, but what about you? You know, you didn't do this
Yeah.
one thing that I asked you to
Mhm.
do the other day.
Well, I mean, and it could be as simple as saying you never put the toilet seat down
Mhm.
or something like that, and kind of being very, very critical of them and what they're doing instead of making a complaint about a problem
Mhm.
or a behavior. And contempt really is more attacking a person's sense of self,
Mhm.
making them feel like they're stupid or worthless or unimportant. So it's a little more harmful actually than criticism, and is actually over any of the other indicators of divorce the highest indicator of divorce when there's contempt in a relationship or in the communication between two partners.
Yeah, and do you think that contempt, the difference between more like criticism and contempt is that also contempt almost festers over time to where you almost have a resentment
Mm-hmm.
towards a person that you're in a relationship with, um, that almost prevents you from really being able to look at different perspectives or look at their point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with contempt is it's really not trying to get another view across. It's just saying you're this person. Like because of whatever's going on, this is you. You're dumb, you're stupid, you're not worth anything. And there's no real like you might have started out trying to get a message across, but at that point it's just attacking.
Yeah. Well, and let's just go ahead and I guess clarify this for anybody that's
Mm-hmm.
watching. This is really an unhealthy, any of these are kind of
Yeah.
maybe unhealthy ways to deal with conflict. And I really think when you get to the contempt, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this, but that, like you said earlier, is really typically an abusive
Mm-hmm.
type of way to respond to conflict.
Right.
And it can result in either emotional abuse, mental abuse, and maybe even can lead to some physical abuse if it escalates to that point. But it really is a way of conflict that the other person almost seems like they're trying to take control over
Right.
the situation by doing something that could be very damaging to another
Mm-hmm.
person's feelings, emotions,
Right.
sense of self, whatever that is.
Well, and there's a very big condescension part of it too. So
Like a lack of ownership, you think, for the other person?
yes.
Yeah.
Well, there is no ownership of own if you're if you're the person who's being contemptful in the relationship, then you're not really owning any of your own stuff. You're just saying you're bad, you know,
Mhm.
everything is your fault.
Yeah. Well, let's before we go on to the next two, Elizabeth, I want to interject here and ask you. I know what I see on my end, right? Of like the
Hmm.
lack of ownership, really, or the lack of acceptance of one's own responsibility in a conflict,
Hmm.
because normally a conflict requires two people.
Yes.
How much do you see that as a barrier for couples or even other relationships to be able to move forward if there is one person that is just really not willing to take ownership of the things that they may have done to contribute to the conflict that they are experiencing?
Well, if there's no ownership and acknowledgement of their own faults and responsibilities in the relationship, then there is no moving forward with it. It's going to stay stuck. And I think that's why contempt is such a big indicator of divorce, because once that's there, if we're not doing something to start accepting responsibility, or changing that communication, learning how to appreciate our partner, then we're either going to end up staying in the relationship with it as bad as it is and not moving forward, or it's going to end.
Yeah.
If no intervention's done and you're not trying to work towards it. I mean, that's why it's the number one indicator of divorce and relationships ending.
Yeah, because I always say that, when there's something in your life you're unhappy about, you really have 3 things that you can do, right? I've found. You can either accept it. So say, okay, I'm accepting this situation, or I'm accepting that this person may not be taking ownership, and I'm going to choose to be able to move, to live in this situation, or to be in this workplace situation, or whatever, whatever relationship it may be. Or you can choose to change it, which changing anything in a relationship requires not just one, but 2 people, right? Like, have you ever had successful couples counseling where one person showed up?
No.
Right? So it takes 2. And so then you can choose to change it, but change is hard, right? Like, and I want to normalize what we're talking about right now too, because we all fall into different patterns of unhealthy communication and conflict. Even me, and I don't know if I speak for you, Elizabeth, but do you ever fall into these things? So, like, just because we're talking about this doesn't mean that it's not easy for anybody to fall into these different ways of handling communication in an unhealthy manner. And a lot of times we have gotten these patterns from things that we were observed or modeled growing up, or things that we have adapted as sometimes defensive mechanisms to protect ourselves. But ultimately what ends up happening is these unhealthy ways of handling communication end up sabotaging the relationships we often want to keep. And so that's why we're talking about this today, because it is important to understand if you fall under any of these unhealthy patterns of resolving conflict, of how you can take some ownership of it to change some of these dynamics in your relationship, because you can have a better relationship. You can have better relationships in general. It's just, we all have to do the work. And so back to the 3 things, it's either accept it, change it, or leave it.
Right.
And so I guess what I'm hearing you say with contempt, to get back to our train of thought, was that for that, you find that people often, if they aren't able to resolve that or notice that, then that can be an indicator of the relationship ending.
And really, research has shown more than anything else that could happen in a relationship, more than infidelity, even abuse, physical abuse, that having that in your communication is the single biggest indicator.
Yeah. Well, what's the other 2? I know you had 2 other ones. We got criticism, contempt. What are the other 2? I guess, and they call this the 4 horsemen, just to clarify. It's from the Gottmans, who are these relationship gurus, I call them. I've done a lot of research and worked with a lot of couples and trained a lot of couples therapists about these different interactions, but and how they can lead to unhealthy patterns of communication. But what are the last 2?
Defensiveness. So trying to ward off the attack. So we go on the defensive. We're just trying to protect ourselves at that point. We're not hearing any other points of view. We're just trying to say, I'm the victim, or it wasn't me, and trying to end the communication that way. Then we have stonewalling. And that one really is just shutting down. So instead of interacting or trying to work on whatever the problem may be, as soon as conflict starts, that person will walk off with withdraw, avoid, whatever they can do to not have to interact at that time.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that one for a little bit, because I think we all can know what defensiveness is. That makes sense. And I think a lot of people can relate to shutting down, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that sometimes people in relationships use shutting down as an excuse. I just want to use this out there to say, like, well, I don't want to say anything I don't mean, or I need to go think about my thoughts. But why is shutting down an unhealthy way to resolve conflict?
Well, because then we're distancing ourselves from our partner, one, and then we stop listening. So there's no more hearing, there's no more talking, there's no more communication. We're just shut down. And it's a rejection too. So whenever we're unwilling to interact and try to work on our problems, if we just avoid it and ignore it, then that means we're rejecting that other person too.
Yeah. And that can actually do just as much harm as like the criticism or the defensiveness or the contempt. Because I think that when you are isolating yourself from anybody in your life, it leaves the person uncertain. And when the other person is uncertain, there is a lot of ambiguity and not knowing how to resolve it. I mean, we can't fix a problem in a relationship, right? Or we can't fix problems in our life if we don't know what the problem is to begin with. And I'm just curious, Elizabeth, I mean, how often do you see people that come in maybe that struggle with not even being able to figure out the problem because they haven't had the space to talk about it?
Probably about 90% of the time.
Yeah. And I think, it goes back to, what do you think? One of the things you said is all of these, what I'm hearing of these different unhealthy ways, or the four horsemen unhealthy ways to handle conflict. There's one thing that's missing out of all of them. And it is the ability to listen and hold the space to try to understand the other person's point of view. Now, we know this is hard, right? Because in relationships, over a period of time, there's a lot of stuff that can happen, right? There's a lot of stuff that
we'll hold on to and not talk about.
Yeah. And so then what happens when people hold on to stuff and not talk about it, Elizabeth?
It goes up.
Yeah, it comes out in some way. I always say whatever is in has to come out at some point, right? And so whatever you're holding in emotionally, it's going to come out. And it's not always going to come out in the best way if we don't know how to process this. So, okay, so now that we've talked about maybe 4 ways to that people tend to react in unhealthy ways in relationships. And if you're listening to us, I really want to encourage you to just think about those things and think about your relationships and think about which one you tend to navigate to. Because I do think we all have an unhealthy way that we tend to navigate to when we're super stressed out, overwhelmed, feeling upset. There's one tendency we go. So we either become defensive, we either become criticizing, we either become contempt. We have contempt for the other person, or we tend to shut down. And so I encourage you just to reflect on which one you tend to go to. And then, Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about, if we have these responses, what's the best way to do things a little bit differently that may react in a better, healthier way to have conflict?
Well, so to start off, anytime we're in conflict or we're going to have a discussion about something that we know is going to cause conflict, then it's really important we always start with I statements. Instead of putting blame on the other person, we talk about I feel frustrated, angry, whatever those feelings
Not you made me feel this way. Just to clarify.
Or you did this. and I'm angry. If we start it with I, then already that takes some of the blame off the other person and can allow us to maybe keep our emotions from getting too out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
And even though people will try, you really can't argue with the way someone feels.
Mm-hmm.
If I say I feel angry, you can't tell me I don't.
Right.
That's how I feel. Now, there may be a lot of stuff we need to work on with actions and behaviors, but how I feel or how you feel can't be argued with.
Yeah, and this is a good point, because I do think sometimes what happens in conflict is that somebody will go into that criticism mode and try to diminish how the other person feels,
Right.
because it does not make sense to them
Mm-hmm.
why you may feel that way. But the truth is that, like you said, no one is a mind reader. I mean, I have yet to find somebody who is a legit mind reader. I mean, there are people that get good at it, but like most of us cannot read the other person's mind, and we can't know how somebody else feels.
No.
But it may not make sense to us why that other person feels that way. But I think validating somebody's feeling about a situation goes a long way in being able to help figure out how to move forward. So I guess I feel statements communicating how you feel, being able to clearly say, this is how I feel about something. What else, Elizabeth, do you think would be?
So another one is reminding ourselves of our partner's good qualities. So being appreciative. It's really easy to get caught up in all the negatives, all the things our partner is or isn't doing, and what's wrong, what we don't like. By nature, we're negative, and that's what we see first. But if we can start reminding ourselves, okay, what are my partner's good qualities? What can I find gratitude in? How can I be appreciative of this person? Then while those negatives might still be there, they don't have as much power. And we're not going to jump to how horrible you are as a person every time we get angry when we know that's not true.
Well, and Elizabeth, I have never found anybody yet who wants to change if they feel like somebody feels like they're a horrible person. Right?
No.
Like in a relationship, if you think that I'm a horrible person, I'm just going to use this as an example myself, then that's not much. And I can do nothing right.
Right.
Right. And according to my partner, there may be nothing that I do that they appreciate. Is that going to make me want to change?
No.
So you're right. So part of it, appreciation, and it is hard when you have a lot of resentment or hurt or feelings towards the person in your life that is supposed to be your safe space, to be able to find things that you appreciate about them when everything you just notice is the things that are more of all what they're doing wrong, or how they're not meeting your needs, or how things are not going right. But I guess part of it is when you enter that conflict, maybe even trying to look at that conflict, at least what I'm hearing you say, is from a way to say, hey, we're going to talk about this thing that we need to resolve, but I do appreciate this, this, and this about you. I just want us to figure out how to move forward on this thing that's bothering me.
Right. And even making that culture of appreciation something that we do not just when we're in conflict. So if we're doing that daily, like reminding ourselves of, okay, he took out the trash today, instead of all the days he didn't, then that's going to put us in a different mindset, so that when there is conflict, it's a lot easier to manage that negative stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what? Just you reminded me about, and Elizabeth, you might have been about to say this, but when you're saying about how to do it on the daily, not even when you're in conflict, something that I've always suggested to people too is sometimes you need to have a conversation when you're in a good place with your partner about how you're going to communicate when there is a conflict.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're talking about right now. How do you set the groundwork of like, here's how we're going to deal with things that bother us.
Mm-hmm.
Here's when we're going to communicate about them. Here's how we're going to communicate about them. Hey, do you need some space for a few minutes? And there's a difference between stonewalling and shutting down and communicating that when we have a conflict, we may both need a little bit of time so that we can regulate our emotions and come back to the table a little bit more calmer. But I think the difference between that is communicating up front about how you're going to handle that conflict.
Right. And that's really important, to kind of have that groundwork, and even to say like, okay, if it gets to the point that we're yelling at each other, then we're just going to take that time out and we're going to calm down and we're going to come back to this later and we can actually discuss it and hear each other instead of yell and scream and ignore or whatever it is that we do.
Yeah. Well, I know, Elizabeth, we're about to be out of time today, but what are some other things or anything else that you had that you would say that you would really encourage people to do to be able to communicate in a little bit more healthy way through conflict?
One other thing that's really important is for each of us to be able to take some responsibility. So if we're having conflict, or if our partner comes to us and is upset about something, almost 100% of the time there is something in there that we can take responsibility for, that we could say, yeah, I could have said that differently or done that differently, and I apologize for that. So it might not fix the whole problem, but it definitely makes it a lot easier to either keep talking about or to just say, that wasn't what they meant, and be able to walk away and not really affect the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you were saying that, one other thing came to mind too, is not only taking ownership, but if there is something that you are committing to in the relationship that you are saying that you will make an effort to change, is really making sure that you follow through with that. Because what ends up happening is if you can't follow through on the things that you do make a commitment to change with, and don't get me wrong, it's hard. Follow through is hard for any of us.
Yes.
But a real effort to follow through, because if not, then what happens is when you have conflict in the future, then your partner starts to then believe, well, maybe this person is just telling me these things to appease me or to whatever. So not only just ownership, but I think maybe this is a great way to wrap up this conversation, is intentional action. Because words are important, and we need to be very aware of the words that we use in communication with other people. But I think even more important is what we do with the words that we say, that really can be game changers in the relationship.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, Elizabeth, any final thoughts before we wrap up today, or any other words of wisdom that you would just want couples to know, or just people that are in relationship to know?
Well, I mean, really just that no matter how bad things can get, if both people are willing to work on it and want the relationship to work and are willing to do the work, then that relationship and those problems can definitely be improved significantly.
Yeah, and we've seen it, right? I mean, we've seen people come in here and really intentionally work on how can we be better individuals and how can we be better together. And it changes the dynamic of their relationship, but I guess the big thing is just like sometimes easing into this like even this conversation, right? And communicating, it can be uncomfortable, but I think leaning into the discomfort is really where change can happen. And that's part of the reason why we came on here today, was we really would love to see just anybody in their life be able to have healthier ways to resolve conflict so that they can have relationships that they feel good about. Right. And that they wake up in and they're like, yes, this is the relationship I want to be in. Right. And it it doesn't happen overnight. Problems in a relationship don't occur overnight, and change doesn't happen overnight. But with learning how to communicate and resolve conflict in a healthy way, and then being intentional about making those changes as you move forward, you really can show up and have a relationship that is one that you want to be in, and that you're like, yes, this is the relationship I'd hope for. So, well, thank you, Elizabeth, for coming on and sharing. I just want to let everybody know that if you have any feedback for us, feel free to let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this conversation that we had and you want to hear more about relationship topics and ways to improve relationships in your life, please let us know in the comments below or reach out to us, because we really want to provide some information that can be helpful for you and that can be helpful for your relationships or your life. But we do want to share some exciting news. We do have some things exciting happening over here at Be Inspired Counseling and Consulting. One of our exciting news is we do have another therapist joining our team, Missy Daniel. She'll be coming on board, and she will be able to work with couples, but also individuals. And she has some specialization in working with individuals that have either experienced relationships that have been abusive or been a part of abuse cycle. And so definitely check her out on our website. We're excited to have her. We also have one of our other therapists, Melissa McKinney, who's coming full time with us. And we're really excited to have her here more. And another really exciting thing that we're having is we're actually expanding. And so when you come to Be Inspired Counseling and Consulting in the future, we will actually have the whole building that we're in right now. So we'll also be moving into the upstairs. And so we're really excited to be able to expand, because that's just going to help us help more people. And so if you ever have any questions about things that we do or who we are or who we serve and how we can help, just reach out to us and give us a call. We always say that we want to get you the help you need. So if we're not the help, we'll find help for you. But please feel free to reach out with any questions or any feedback you have. We'd love to be able to continue to help in any way we can. So anyways, thanks again, Elizabeth, for all your wisdom and knowledge. She really is our couples guru around here. So I always appreciate her coming on and sharing some good information about how we can all work towards improving our relationship. So until next time, we'll see y'all next month. But until then, I hope you have a great rest of the week.
Bye.